All eyes are at this point on US President Donald Trump, who's expected to drop another tariff bombshell. Trump has warned that countries which side with the policies of the BRICS alliance, of which India is also a part, will be hit with an extra 10% tariff. The US had set a 9 July deadline for countries to agree on a trade deal, but US officials now say tariffs will begin on August 1st. Trump said he would send letters to countries telling them what the tariff rate will be if an agreement is not reached upon. Since taking charge of the Oval Office in January, Donald Trump has announced a series of import tariffs on goods from other countries, arguing they will boost American manufacturing and also protect jobs in the US. India and the US have been locked in a detailed negotiations for a bilateral trade agreement. These talks began after the US president hiked the tariff on India to 26% from the previous 10%. However, the Modi government has stated that it will prioritize national interest when it comes to the deal with the US as opposed to meeting a deadline. As per reports, India and the US are expected to strike a mini trade deal, which would then pave the way for broader discussions between the two partners. So what does the Trump's tariffs threat mean for India and the world? Joining me on the show tonight, Professor Andrew Latham is author and professor of political science at Macalester College, York University, USA. Gucharan Das is an economist. We have Sierra Claire, professor and foreign policy commentator, joining me from Los Angeles. We'll be joined by Prameet Pal Chaudhary, who is the India practice head of Eurasia Group, in just a bit. Ms. Claire, let me begin with you. I mean, there are lots of talks around tariffs, a lot of anticipation as to what comes next, because, Donald Trump did throw up a surprise when he said that there'll be an extra tariff for all those countries who are part of the BRICS.
Yes. Well, I think that we've seen, the markets have cooled a little bit from when he first started these tariff negotiations back in April, and we had these really big up and down, changes in the market. And today we have seen a little dip here in the US, but it's nothing like it was. So people are kind of getting used to this negotiating process a little bit. And then as far as the BRICS nation goes, I think that Trump's main focus with that is protecting the US dollar as the world's reserve currency, which he rightfully is concerned about that for US national security interests, as well as for the rest of the world, because there could be cascading economic effects around the world. So I think that's his main interest there with that note that he had said that he was putting the extra 10% onto those BRICS nations.
Comment on this, Professor Latham. Your thoughts on this as Donald Trump announces a series of import tariffs on countries. Do you think this argument that this will boost American manufacturing and protect jobs and create more jobs, does it really work that way?
Well, I think he's being motivated by several contradictory impulses. On the one hand, he thinks tariffs are going to raise revenues because he wants to reduce the income tax. And he harkens back to the early 20th century in that regard. Secondly, he thinks that they're bargaining leverage, that he can use these tariffs to beat other countries into concessions that favor the U.S. in terms of bilateral trade relations. And thirdly, and distantly, and this is where it all becomes incompatible, he thinks that if he raises the tariff barriers high enough, companies from around the world will relocate within the United States to avoid paying tariffs. Those three things don't go together, and on any given day, in any given hour on any given day, Donald Trump is touting one of these three logics, and it doesn't make much sense. Slightly deeper than that, though, the American-led rules-based international order, which until 5 minutes ago was called the liberal international order, that the U.S. and a few other countries built after World War II, and that were globalized at the end of the Second World War, and nobody questioned. China didn't question it, India didn't question it. They're now being questioned by the global South, as it were, as manifest in this institution called the BRICS. And if they pull this off, de-dollarization will be a thing. But the entire trade order, which the United States both constructed and benefits from, will fracture, fragment, and possibly disappear into the clouds of history. And the Trump administration is arguably correctly fighting back against that. And I think we're going to see increasingly this tension, not quite a Cold War, but a tension between the BRICS nations and those that still subscribe to the American liberal / rules-based international order. Countries like India are caught in between. India is going to do a good deal, a mutually beneficial deal with the United States on trade bilaterally, but also belongs to the global South, also aspires to lead the global South, and is part of BRICS, and therefore is going to be subject to these tariffs unless and until a deal can be struck between India and the United States. I'm very optimistic about India. Brazil, China, Russia, and there's way more than just the BRICS countries. The acronym now would be like 27 letters long. Lots of countries, because it is the institutional manifestation of the global South. And the global South is rising up against the global North led by the United States. And it remains to be seen over time how that's going to play out.
Okay. That's actually very well put. So thank you so much. Let me bring in Gurcharan Das. Professor Das, the question here is, which are the sectors do you think will be hardest hit because of these tariffs here in India?
Well, the agriculture is what we have called our red line. And the reason why is quite obvious. We have half our population almost engaged in agriculture and dependent on it. But I think we are also making a mistake in the sense that I believe, the first green revolution was created by science, by these hybrid seeds that came from Mexico. The second green revolution has to be again created by science. We need to improve productivity. And what we have failed so far is that our productivity has not gone up, partly because we have got this religious, it's almost ideologues who are against genetically modified seeds. And if we give in to the US, for example, on GM soya, which is one of the things that they want, we should give in to that because it will benefit us in the end. In fact, we should relook at our entire agricultural strategy to turn it towards, look at the lesson we've learned from Sri Lanka. They followed that whole idea of organic farming, again, a religious ideological idea. And look what happened to them. They became a basket case within a year. So, but the real issue for India is that Mr. Trump is making us do what we should be doing in our own interest, which is to lower our tariffs, and we've been talking about it, to the ASEAN levels. Only then will we join up with the global supply chains, the global value chains as they are called, and there'll be hope for our manufacturing sector. Our manufacturing sector has been a failure. It employs only 11% of the people, represents only 15% of GDP, and represents only 2% of manufactured exports. So we've been shown the way by Apple. That's the way to go. We should go to the top labor-intensive FMCG FMCG brands in the world. They're all labor-intensive, Nike, etc., clothes, shoes, toys, food processing, all these are where we should be going. When the Prime Minister of Vietnam heard that they had lost the iPhone to India, he flew to Cupertino, California, and he spoke to the CEO of Apple, and he said, look, we've lost the iPhone, give us the iPad. He got the iPad. Now, every chief minister who aspires to make his state an industrial state, we have not, he should do that, go there, but we haven't created an industrial revolution, although we may be the fastest growing economy in the world today. Okay. We've grown, and we've grown well. We've grown at 6% over these last 30 years. But now, if we want to achieve the Viksit Bharat, it's got to be 7.3%. Therefore, trade policy, industrial policy, political policy, diplomatic policy, security policy, all have to be 7.3% economic growth is the minimum, and we can achieve it.
Okay.
And
Mr.
that's how
Chaudhary-
we lift up
that's
the
an
people.
interesting point that has been made by economist Gurcharan Das on the show, that there's no need to fear per se. Perhaps the United States' new tariff policy is driving India in the right direction. What are your thoughts?
Sorry, is that aimed at me?
Yes, Mr. Chaudhary, that's a question to you, sir.
Yeah. So look, I think there's a number of issues here, but I think Gurcharan's position that we can use trade policy to push for internal reform, especially in agriculture, is well taken. Norman Borlaug, the father of the Green Revolution, he won a Padma Shri from us and a Nobel Prize from the rest of the world, was a strong supporter of genetic modification because he argued hybridization and the gene editing that we now use, for example, in our crops, with basically all forms of the same technology. So there was no real case for the ban on it. I think that is a good point. But we cannot do that, unfortunately, politically, under pressure from another country. We should be doing this on our own. But anyway, that is one issue there. I think the question on the tariffs issue, one, I don't think the BRICS tariff should be taken very seriously. Trump has said this before. Every time the word BRICS is mentioned to him, he says, "Oh, I'm going to hit them with a tariff if they do anything against America." And you may famously remember he thought Spain was a member of the BRICS, which it wasn't, at a press conference. He's not even clear which countries are a member of the BRICS. But he also said in his statement, if they carry out anti-American alignments, but within the BRICS, especially the 5 founding members, India and Brazil have been very clear internally that they do not want the BRICS to be anti-Western. They want it to be representative of emerging economies and potentially the global South, but they do not see it as an anti-Western organization, which is what Russia and China wanted to do. It was India and Brazil that killed the BRICS currency proposal when it came up. They were also the ones who killed the idea of a BRICS blockchain, which was designed to destroy the SWIFT payment system, again, a Russia-Chinese thing. So the American side knows full well that within the BRICS, India is one of the champions against de-dollarization, against the weaponization of the BRICS against the West. And that will continue to be a problem. If you look at the new members that are coming into the BRICS, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt are military allies of the United States. Iran obviously will be hostile, but many of the other new members are very close to America and do not necessarily share this agenda. So that is something the BRICS we'll see how it evolves over a period of time. But the State Department and so on know full well the nature of the internal mechanism of the BRICS. What we are waiting for is Trump to announce the nature of the bilateral trade agreement with India, which at present is in trouble.
But Mr. Chaudhary, do you think that India has opened enough channels with other countries, particularly in Europe, to somehow neutralize if there is going to be an impact of what appears to be inevitable here?
So we will face a 10% baseline tariff from the United States, as will virtually every other country in the world. The question really is, what happens beyond the baseline, and what do you do about the so-called sectoral tariffs? In other words, the 40% on aluminum and steel, the 25% potentially on auto components, and so on and so forth. If the rest of, when you talk to the Indian industry, their view is that if the rest of the world gets the same tariff, or more importantly, if our competitors get a higher tariff, and this means mainly China, then we can live with that. 10% baseline tariff is almost already absorbed because the rupee has devalued 8% against the dollar in the past 2 years. So we haven't effectively neutralized that 10% tariff anyway. The real issue, therefore, is what do other countries get? Second, you say that do we have alternative markets? Nothing can replace the United States. Not so much as industrial goods. We are not a major goods manufacturer. But look at it. Our fastest growing goods export right now, as Gurcharan correctly pointed to, was Apple iPhones. Who is the biggest buyer of Apple iPhones? It's the United States. Our main export to America is their own product, which is the iPhone. We are not a major agricultural exporter, and almost no other part of the world accepts agricultural exports from India of any real size and consequence, except for Africa and mainly the Middle East, which we already have perfectly good trade relations with. We are an exporter of auto components. Yes, again, it is America, and only America and Europe, which pick up some of that. And we are close to some kind of a trade agreement with Europe. But keep in mind that Europe is the most difficult market to sign an FTA with. We have been negotiating now for 22 years to get one with the Europeans. Yes, we probably get some kind of a basic early harvest agreement by December, but it'll not be an easy market to penetrate. The one country we cannot do an FTA with is China. And that is the world's second largest economy, but we cannot do that because they would destroy our economy along the way. So the Middle East has been our biggest regional market. We already have a perfectly sound, they have very low tariffs anyway, so we already have great market access. But keep in mind, America is India's overwhelmingly largest economic partner. It is our main source of FDI, it is our main source of FII, it is our main source of remittances, and it is our largest trading partner. It's one of the few countries in the world where we trade more with the United States than we do with China. So it's very difficult to replace America. So what we are looking for is to stabilize that relationship with coming through some kind of a trade agreement with the United States. At least that can last for the Trump administration. Keep in mind that nothing Trump does is treaty-based. It's not binding. It's probably only going to be executive orders because he does not have trade promotion authority from the Senate. And he'll never get it because it requires 2/3 of the senators, which he is nowhere close to getting. So whatever we do with Trump, we have to see it as a 2 to 3 year period window at best on the trade front.
All right, Mr. Chaudhary, really appreciate your time. Thank you, Ms. Claire Gurcharandas and Professor Latham for joining us on this broadcast.